You're listening to The Range, Gardner-Webb University streaming and on-demand programming. And my name is Jeff, and in the studio with me is Dr. Don Berry, a professor of religious studies here at Gardner-Webb University and an expert on Islam. You've written books, and you've given speeches, and you've given special presentations all over the place on topics related to Islam. So why I want you in here today to talk is about the travel ban, which we can debate whether or not it's an actual ban. There's been a lot of talk about the use of that word, but the restrictions on immigration into the United States from 7 countries out of the Middle East and North Africa. And particularly, given your background, want to know how you think this may play out, not so much domestically here in the United States, but in the Arab world, in the Muslim world. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Jeff.
And what are your thoughts? It's a 90-day ban on travel from 7 countries. I think it's fair to say that those 7 countries are countries with a lot of internal turmoil and a lot of terrorist recruiting and training going on in them.
Well, since the Arab Spring that actually started in December of 2011, that there has been an uproar throughout the Middle East and majority Muslim countries. And so there's been a lack of stability even among historically stable countries. Mm-hmm. And that has not really ceased yet. I mean, that is still in process, right, because they're trying to determine what kind of government best suits for majority Muslim environment, and there's not a common agreement.
Yeah, and then there's the Sunni-Shia divide, which feeds into a lot of this. And I guess one of the worst examples of the chaos that's followed in the wake of the Arab Spring would be in Syria, where you have a multi-sided civil war, you have foreign intervention, and just terrible atrocities.
And you have a government that's heavily supported by Russia, and you have a government that pretty much has been in league long enough that it is not quite a dictatorship, but mm-hmm. certainly has a very strong hand and strong authority.
2 generations, same family.
And the U.S. and other Western European countries thinking that could lead to mm-hmm. another Saddam Hussein kind of mm-hmm. situation, and therefore not supporting that. But because of Russian support, then all of a sudden that becomes a very challenging situation. One of the biggest problems in the Middle East is usually not within the country. It's the people behind the people trying to push them. In Iraq, you have people from Iran pushing mm-hmm. the Shiites, mm-hmm. and you have people from Saudi Arabia and a variety of places that are pushing the Sunni. So you have people who probably want to get on with their lives because they've gone through all these years with Saddam Hussein. They've gone through war and known war. Some children have known war their whole life. Mm-hmm. And they're wanting to get on with life, but these outside influences simply won't let them do it.
Yeah, those outside influences, a lot of times what we're seeing are basically proxy wars, where someone else has an agenda right. to push, and they're sending in the weapons and the funding, and sometimes the fighters.
And the Lebanese civil war actually is a proxy war between Syria and Israel mm-hmm. over what land that Israel's going to have as a buffer in order to protect itself from Scud missiles and other things mm-hmm. coming from mm-hmm. Lebanon.
So again, these are very chaotic places with many different groups. Many of them over the years have become more and more radicalized. And there are people there, as you say, wanting to get on with their lives and deciding that they can't do it in, whether it's Sudan or whether it's Syria, and they need to leave. And many of them are members of persecuted minorities, such as Syrian Christians and Yazidis, etc. And we've seen thousands, hundreds of thousands of people trying to leave the Middle East. And with that has come a number of problems. And I think the ban on travel is a reaction to some of these problems that we've seen, some of these terrorist attacks in Europe in particular.
And I think from the president's perspective, it seems like he is attempting to take seriously a campaign promise. Mm-hmm. He's trying to take seriously Americans' concern for their own safety and well-being.
Yeah, we've seen the terrorist attacks in Europe using trucks and other weapons as well, and we've had some here in the United States. And so, as you say, during the presidential campaign, one of the big things was that President Trump promised, I think he called it extreme vetting.
But I think after having said that, I think my concerns are multifaceted. One, I'm concerned by how quickly this seemed to take place, in the fact that I'm not sure, for all indications, that the people who would have to enforce this policy was handed this policy fairly late in the game.
Yeah.
That there was not a uniform training, because one of his aides said this did not apply to people with green cards, and another one said it did. And so you have those issues. You have federal court judges who basically have said these people are not going to be deported because we're trying to see whether or not we actually violated the law and the rights of these people who have legally obtained a visa to be able to automatically just kick them out. And so, and then there's been the reaction even of GOP people like John McCain, who basically see this as setting back the whole war against terror a number of years. I think one of the difficulties is going to be that there is going to be a backlash. What direct responses we've seen from Muslim countries have been very guarded. Some have been subtle, by like Turkey, who is willing to accept refugees. And basically what's implied is we're not, so we will.
Yeah.
And so... But I think what it's going to do is I think it will set back. I agree with John McCain. I think this, even though it is not a ban on Muslims, even though it's not an attack directly on Islam, it will be used that way, and it will be sold that way by Muslim radicals.
We've seen ISIS already saying this was a wonderful thing because it demonstrated from their point of view that, yes, indeed, the United States is involved in some sort of war on Islam.
And from President Bush's administration, you see that both Republican and Democratic presidents have tried to focus, this is a war on terror, not a war on Islam.
Right.
And basically now we have we have destroyed that image that we have tried to establish from multiple presidents from both parties, that we are at war with terror, but we are not singling out a people simply because they have the name Muslim associated with them. Now that's a harder position to be able to defend, that is our political position. Now, granted, as you said earlier, that it applies to all people. There are Syrian Christians who are not allowed to come to this country because of the travel ban, that it applies to all citizens. But the reality is most of these countries have a vast majority of its populace being Muslim, and therefore it's not a hard sell for a radical group to say, see, this is a continuation of the Crusades. The Crusades have never stopped. The existence of Israel is a continuation of the Crusades, and now they want to say they're fighting terrorists, but in fact, they are trying to destroy Islam. And what people have been saying for the last 120 years after colonial occupation, the West is the source of all of our problems. We get rid of the West and get them out of our lives, and we can be strong and restore our vitality, restore our culture, and restore our faith, which I think is kind of a pie crust promise that can't be fulfilled, but nevertheless, it sells, and that's the kind of message that radical Muslims are using. And, we know from history, if you can blame somebody as being the source of your problem, it's so easy to unify people.
Exactly. Now, as I understand it, the travel restrictions on these 7 nations are in effect for 90 days, with the exception of Syria, which I think is kind of indefinitely in place. But any sense of what might happen at the end of that 90 days? Do we just go back to what it was before? Or, I'm asking you to do a very difficult thing, is like look into the crystal ball. What do you think might happen?
Right now, I'm not certain what'll happen because it seems one of the concerns that I have is that presidents have always tried to listen to advisors who knew more, because a president cannot know everything about every
Sure.
situation. Mm-hmm. And so they listen to advisors and then they take action based on that. I'm not sure, it doesn't appear that there has been either people who are not aware that are advising him, or he is not listening to those who are capable of advising him on these kind of situations. And that is a concern for me, because on the one hand, I understand the importance of fulfilling campaign promises. I understand the importance for American people to feel safe. But at the same time, this is not a short-term problem. This is a long-term problem. And it takes years to get to the point where we are. Unfortunately, it can only take moments to undo years' worth of progress. And so before any further damage and any further empowerment of people who are representing radical Islam, that I hope that they are a little more calculated in what they do next than what it seemed when they did initially the travel ban.
I do think it's interesting to note that when something happens here, a policy change happens in the United States, you see these ripple effects across the globe. So what happens does matter with our perception in other parts of the world.
And even beyond just the Muslim world, you're looking at the UK, in which 1.5 million people have signed a petition for President Trump not to be invited to come there and for a visit. Yeah. And so it seems that we're burning bridges with a lot of our allies that simply do not support or do not like our approach to things. And unfortunately, the presidential response is, too bad.
Yeah.
We've been too soft too long. And even though that is a strong sell here, when it comes down to it, if we are involved in any kind of military conflict, we have alienated those people who would join us. And between that and the fact that people in Iraq that we're saying, you are not welcome in this country, we're also saying you are not welcome even if you have fought beside us. You're not welcome in this country. And so all of a sudden, any military situation, it's going to be our troops, because the others say, what's the motivation for doing that? You don't like me, you don't welcome me into your country, I can't even visit, and I've risked my life. Why do I continue to risk my life? And so fighting the kind of conflicts that we fought may be more difficult if this is going to be a kind of pattern of behavior. And we may find that if we're concerned about a particular situation, the only way we're going to be able to deal with it is to send our own men and women into the situation.
Okay, some interesting comments here from Dr. Don Berry, religious studies professor here at Gardner-Webb, and our kind of go-to guy when we're talking about things that involve Islam and the Islamic world. And thank you very much for coming by. We appreciate it. You're listening to The Range, Gardner-Webb University Radio, WGWG.org.